Parade of Science. Man's condition in the years to come, human life in this atomic age, depends largely on the achievements men make today. Upon the foundations being laid by modern scientists will rest the civilization, the joys and comforts of tomorrow. Every day in every land, resolute men of science bend their efforts to new discoveries, new truths, and new applications of the knowledge man has already gained. The day-by-day accounts of their achievements are windows through which we may see a part of the future being born. Parade of Science.
An Office of Science within the State Department has been proposed.
Our State Department has proposed that the government assemble some of America's outstanding scientists in a federal science office, whose representatives would be attached to our diplomatic staffs in 13 world capitals, as well as the occupation forces in Germany and Japan. The recommendation was made by a special consultant to the State Department, Dr. Lloyd Berkner, who's been working since last October on a survey of what he calls the State Department's responsibilities in international science. He believes that the formation of a science office would encourage the free international exchange of scientific information, which is vital to the continued progress of science. It's a move which some circles regard as an answer to criticism by many eminent scientists that the government is, in effect, cutting off its nose to spite its face, damming up the flow of technical knowledge in the interest of military security, and thus slowing down scientific progress. At present, from 3 to 5 years sometimes elapse between the time that a scientific development is announced overseas and the time it becomes known in this country. The science office, as Dr. Berkner envisions it, would be headed by one of the nation's leading scientists, whose staff would consist of a deputy science advisor and 3 scientists representing the physical, biological, and engineering fields. The science office would continually receive and distribute reports from its representatives all over the world to bring America up to date. Dr. Berkner points to how Great Britain has preceded this country in the development of jet airliners as one example of how our scientists can be outdistanced. Here's a brief excerpt from the Berkner report to Secretary of State Acheson, which is worth hearing.
Since science is essentially international in character, it provides an effective medium by means of which men can meet and exchange views in an atmosphere of intellectual freedom and understanding. It is, therefore, an effective instrument of peace. The healthy development of American science and technology that is essential to our national existence requires that American scientists have free access to and be fully aware of scientific thought everywhere, and that they join in its creation.
Then Dr. Berkner added this thought.
American access to foreign sources implies of necessity a two-way flow of scientific information if our access is to be anything but sketchy and difficult. We in America are dangerously prone to underestimate the importance of foreign scientific progress. Scientific developments are increasingly recognized to be essential to economic welfare, and from its economic welfare stems the political security and stability of any nation. The United States recognizes this truth, not only with respect to its own economy and welfare, but also through its programs of technical assistance with respect to the other nations of the world. By thus strengthening and bringing about self-supported economies in free nations throughout the world, this country seeks to counter the occurrence of economic depression and thus to offset the threat of communist infiltration.
Those are the potent arguments of Dr. Lloyd Berkner, a special consultant to the State Department who has suggested that this government set up and maintain a science office to aid in transmitting scientific information around the world.
There's a tough new plastic that may replace metal gears.
The continued use of plastics is more and more becoming the hallmark of our way of life. For these man-made substances, in many respects, are replacing materials which man has used for thousands of years, wood, metal, and cloth. Now on the horizon is a plastic which is heralded as the logical replacement for metal gears. A plastic which resists wear and chemical attack, yet can be made as soft as a rubber balloon or as hard as your telephone. Its manufacturers believe that this new plastic will become one of the basic raw materials of the rubber industry. Gears made of this new plastic have been operating for longer than a year in jobs where conventional metal gears have failed in a matter of a few weeks. The new plastic will be showing up in washing machine parts, too, because of its resistance to corrosion. In electric insulation, fuel pump parts, and various automotive parts, this new plastic will soon be replacing metal. Another valuable plastic has been released for civilian use by the Army, which developed and improved it during the war. This new plastic is called Cocoon, and it's been used widely in preserving United States air and naval equipment. It forms a waterproof surface, a continuous plastic seal with none of the usual seams or overlaps. It resists fire, mold, mildew, and industrial fumes. Cocoon, which is applied as liquid and becomes a solid on contact with the air, offers new chemical protection against weather and age.
Millions of dollars are to be spent in a new program to develop the metal titanium.
Any time that hard-headed businessmen decide to sink several $1 million in research to study a new metal, you can be sure that they're planning to get their money's worth. And such a research program has been planned for a member of the metals family whose future seems assured. The name of this metal is titanium. And what's touched off the blaze of interest in the metal is an announcement from the United States Navy. American chemists and metallurgists have devised a titanium alloy which is superior to almost any other metal for high-temperature jobs. This new alloy contains 5% chromium, 3% aluminum, and the rest, 92%, is titanium. A brilliant future is predicted for this alloy because it combines so many important properties. It's just as tough as high-temperature steel, yet it weighs only half as much. It's almost as light as aluminum, yet it's as corrosion-resistant as platinum. This, then, seems to be the logical metal to use in the engines of jet airplanes, where high temperatures tend to warp or wreck ordinary metals. Titanium keeps its shape. And we have plenty of titanium. It's available by the ton in this country. You can see, then, why American industry is so excited by this report from the Navy's Bureau of Aeronautics. A huge titanium development program costing several $1 million is now in the works of at least half a dozen major industrial plants. Titanium's first use is likely to be in aviation, where strength and lightness form a combination eagerly sought. In seagoing vessels whose machinery and hulls are so constantly attacked by saltwater corrosion, titanium will also be welcome. But the United States Bureau of Mines, which first called attention to this useful metal, says that titanium will find a place for itself throughout private industry. For one thing, titanium improves steel for all sorts of uses, makes it a fine high-temperature steel for cutting, and because of its indifference to temperatures, it can make better steel for use in refrigerator cooling units. The mainsprings and hairsprings in wristwatches may soon be made of this metal, replacing the aluminum and steel wire which you'll find inside your present watch. The new metal will soon be used throughout boiler plants and in portable machine tools, which must be strong enough to do the job, yet light enough to be carried. Even in the flints which spark your cigarette lighter, there, too, titanium will find a use. This new metal, now formed into a useful alloy, is the fourth most abundant in the earth, and because of its tremendous potential value in the construction industry, it's been labeled the building material of the 21st century.
Psychologists have developed some interesting new information on loss of sleep and its effect on learning.
Most of us have noticed that we can sometimes lose sleep and still feel more alert mentally than with our full quota of rest. But we know that this is true only in certain cases. Knowing this fact to exist, two psychologists at the University of Kentucky recently made some interesting experiments in that field. They were Drs. Travis Rawlings and Ernest Myers. To tell us more of those experiments, we're pleased to have them as our guests by transcription today. Dr. Rawlings, just what did you do to prepare your subjects for this work?
Well, we asked for volunteers of male students at the University of Kentucky, and we had 50 students that we divided into 6 groups. And those groups were to stay awake 8 hours, 16 hours, 24 hours, 32 hours, 40 hours, and 48 hours. Now, we requested that they get at least 3 nights of normal sleep before the experiment started. Then on the morning of the experiment, we had them come in and take 5 different psychological tests, on which they would be tested again at these specified hours, 8 hours later.
I see. And, Dr. Myers, I'll call on you to tell me what were your findings.
Well, our findings were fairly interesting in that we found that the people who were kept awake merely 8 hours gained in their performance, probably as a result of practice. Likewise, the 16-hour group gained, probably as a result of practice. But the people who were required to stay awake 24 hours, or 1 full day and 1 full night, suffered in each of the tests which they took. They suffered a significant decrement in performance. But the interesting thing was that those who were kept awake 32 hours showed an actual increase. Those who were kept awake 32 hours, in other words, performed better in all of the tests than those who were kept awake for 24 hours. The 40-hour group, likewise, did better than those people who were kept awake for 24 hours. And those who were kept awake the longest period of time, 48 hours, suffered just about as much or perhaps a little more than those who stayed awake 24 hours.
Well, now, Dr. Rawlings, how do you explain these unusual results?
Well, there might be more than one explanation. I think probably the best explanation would be that a person who has been awake for 24 hours, this 24-hour period coming in the morning, is probably at a low ebb. Probably he would be usually getting up at that time, and his mental faculties are not as acute as they might normally be. But the group who had stayed awake 32 hours, which is in the middle of the afternoon, has probably made some sort of recovery or made a compensation for having lost this much sleep.
Well, Dr. Myers, what kind or type of mental activity suffers most from this lack of sleep?
Well, we found in this experiment that the kinds of tasks which involve entirely new learning suffered most. For instance, we had subjects learn nonsense syllables, a type of experiment often used in psychology, where there were words of 3 letters which meant absolutely nothing, such as a word like BAX. Well, they learned lists of syllables like this, which required entirely new learning. Well, this type of learning suffered very greatly, whereas performance on intelligence tests, which for the most part test material already well learned, either they knew it or they didn't suffer very much from the effects of fatigue.
Well, Dr. Rawlings, how does loss of sleep affect memory of material that was learned after a period of wakefulness?
Well, 48 hours after these people had learned the material, of course, learning the material after they'd been awake for these differing hours, 8 hours, up to 48 hours, we gave them a test of recall on this material learned. We found that there was no difference in the retention of this material through these differing periods of loss of sleep.
Well, now, can you tell me, please, Dr. Myers, can you catch up on lost sleep, or do you even need to?
You certainly can catch up. You need to, but probably for most people, the interesting fact is that you don't have to catch up by sleeping as much extra time as you've lost. In other words, a person who has stayed awake for 24 hours need only sleep about 12 hours rather than the 8 hours that he normally sleeps in order to catch up sufficiently.
Well, Dr. Rawlings, would you sort of sum up here just a little bit for us and tell us what advice you have for people who are mentally active, advice regarding their sleep habits?
Well, I might give you a few words of that. We found, as Mr. Myers gave in the results, that after 24 hours of sleep, you are at a low ebb, and that at 32 hours, you regain some of this mental activity, and that you can perform almost as well as you could after having lost no sleep, or maybe 8 hours of sleep. But then we notice also that after 32 hours of sleep, our mental activity drops again, and would probably keep on dropping up to 48 hours. So I wouldn't think it'd be advisable for a person to stay up 32 hours to be more mentally acute.
I can see your point readily, sir. Thank you very much, Dr. Rawlings and Dr. Myers, for your very interesting discussion on the effects of loss of sleep.
Parade of Science originates in the studios of WSM and comes to you each Sunday at the same time. The program is designed to keep you informed of the latest developments in the various fields of scientific endeavor, especially as those developments affect our standard of living and our way of life. Parade of Science is conducted by Ernie Keller and written by William McDaniel. This is Tom Hansard speaking.
Parade of Science.